I think it is important that research really looks at that question. And one of the things I'll talk just very briefly about is the ethics of doing that. What are the ethical boundaries that we need to look at when talking about truth? To me, research is integral to the life of a university. That is probably what differentiates it from a college. A university is a place that researches, is interested in truth, is passionate about scholarship, and wants to advance the idea of truth and of knowledge. That's what we're about today, looking at how this university is addressing the question of how do we advance knowledge in Palestinian society. We could, of course, spend the rest of the time talking about these kinds of broad issues, but let me just be a little bit more practical, because I want to, I suppose, advance some kind of ideas about how have I looked at research in my time in Glasgow University, where I was Dean of Education, and more recently in Liverpool Hope University, where I was also Dean of the Faculty of Education. And in both of those universities, I should say, my role was to take what were colleges of education, colleges, to become faculties of education. So what I was doing was trying to move people who were working in colleges into fully fledged university faculties. And that's what my experience has been both in Glasgow and in Liverpool. Just so that you're aware of the geography of this, you will be aware of Scotland being separate from England, and I shouldn't get into the detail of that, but as Palestinians you'll be well aware of boundaries. But the idea of well, England is really that peninsula to the south of Scotland. If you can sort of get your head round that thinking, that just about sums it up. And they are two separate education systems, in fact. But one of the things that I want to reflect on is just what is the nature of work in a university and the range and balance of work in a university. In my experience in universities, there are four things that a university is concerned with: teaching, research, community service, and administration. These are the four areas that a member of staff, a member of the faculty, is engaged in. One of the questions that arises is, what is the balance of that? How much teaching should someone do? How much research? How much community service? How much administration? What is the balance for an individual member of staff? What's the balance for a department? What's the balance for the university as a whole? Let me give the illustration from Liverpool Hope. This isn't something I necessarily want to say should happen here, but it is an indication of what we do at Liverpool Hope. And these are the activities required by the university of a member of staff. Teaching is normally 12 to 14 hours per week. And there are 30 teaching weeks in the year. So 12 to 14 hours of teaching, 10 to 12 hours of research, 10 hours of administration, and 3 hours of community activity. Now, administration can consist of all sorts of things, as attending committee meetings. Sometimes it involves curriculum development meetings and things of that kind. But the sort of administration or marking or putting results into the computer and all that sort of thing. But the balance that I want to to really dwell on, I suppose, is this balance between teaching and research. Most people in Liverpool Hope University are at the top end of that. They do about 14 hours of teaching per week. Occasionally you can get a week when they do 15, 16 hours, but the following week or a subsequent week they might do only 10 hours. But on average, 12 to 14 hours of teaching per week. The research balances that. It's anything from a third to a half of their work is in research. And I want to come back to that because I'm well aware people say, well, we don't have time for research. Where do you get the time? And I will address that problem because it's a common one in universities which are developing a culture of research. They say, yeah, I'm up for research, I would like to do it, but I don't have time. My life is dominated by teaching and by administration, so I don't have time for research. So where are we going to find the time? Well, let me first of all say, when I look at Bethlehem University, I think Bethlehem University is essentially a teaching university, but that teaching should be informed by research. It's not a research university. You do get some universities that are research places that have got big grants from government on all sorts of scientific and medical and other kinds of research. You get some universities dominated by research. You know, if you go to somewhere like Glasgow University and go to the medical faculty, frankly, they are researchers and they find their research occasionally interrupted by a bit of teaching. That's the way they look at it, because they have huge grants and things like, you know, cancer research and things of that kind. And the job of a professor in the medical faculty in Glasgow University can essentially be to do the research. And it's a bit interrupted by the inconvenience of students. That's just how these places are. This university is a university which is essentially about teaching. But that, in my view, means teaching that is informed by research. Now, you might just want to keep that phrase in your mind. How do you inform your teaching by research? What does it imply for staff? It's not just about creating research. Sometimes it's about using it. You know, to be informed, to inform your teaching is to read a book or a journal, to be up to date with what you're doing. That's how you use research. So being research informed doesn't mean everyone having to get a project that is externally funded. It means reading the research, being aware of it, being conscious of what's happening in your subject. The reason you're appointed to be a member of staff of a university is that someone has taken a decision that you are someone who is a leading thinker in your subject. You're a leading historian, or a leading mathematician, or a leading physicist, or a chemist, or an educationist, or someone in occupational therapy, and so on and so forth. You're a leading thinker in your subject. Someone's taken that decision. One of the things that I think, you know, sometimes in universities we don't do enough of is realize what our responsibility is in terms of leading a subject. You know, you're the leaders of your subject in Palestine. You are a person of distinction. Actually, if I may use a quote from the University of Glasgow. I was employed in the University of Glasgow. The University of Glasgow was founded in 1451. Many of the same staff are still there. All the same policies are still there. It was founded in 1451, and one of the statements made by Pope Nicholas V about the University of Glasgow was that the purpose of the university is to raise to distinction those born in the lowest places. Purpose of a university, to raise to distinction those born in the lowest places. Now, if I say something very Scottish, you can't give what you've not got. Now, I grant you the Scots have a reputation of not giving what they do have. I am well aware of that. But you can't give what you've not got, so you have to be a person of distinction, raising your students to distinction. And you do it by being on top of your subject, having subject knowledge that is up to date. That's what you're in the business of. So it's not just creating the research, it's using research. And I think that, to me, is such an important thing. Be on top of your subject. Know what the current thinking is in your subject and work on it. That is an important part, not just doing research, but using research. And that requires a culture of research in the university. And you have in this university a very good library. It's a library that's going to develop. I know there are plans to see it flourish and grow and so on. And the Board of Regents are part of the discussion of how that's going to happen. You have good sets of material and resources. You have good IT facilities. All of that leads to the idea that a culture of research is eminently possible in this university. What is the nature of research? Well, I think that's quite a difficult question to answer across every aspect of a university, because different kinds of knowledge means sometimes different research strategies. People who are in the hard sciences often do a different kind of research in laboratories and working in certain kinds of ways, often externally funded. People in the social sciences do different kinds of research. My background happens to be in education, and that is a different kind of education, a different kind of research from the hard sciences. So you have to know what the research strategies are. One of the things I would say as I've developed research strategies in faculties of education, and I think this is perhaps a more general comment, research should always benefit those who are being researched. I think that's an ethical issue for me. That if you're working in social work and education and all sorts of other areas, the people who should benefit are the people that you're researching. And I think there's an ethic there that is really quite important. So you might want to think about that. Vitally important. It's completely legitimate and proper and wise to research your own practice. Don't think research has always got to be something out there and is in the clouds. It's not. Research can be what you're doing day by day. And if you're struggling to think, what can you research? Talk to somebody about it. And if in the course of the next week you want to talk to me about it, I'm very happy to do that. So the idea of researching your own practice, so that it's not always an added thing. It's something that's just integral to what you do. It's the kind of thing. People should be researching their own practice. And of course, you're building up in the university here, the Centre for Learning and Teaching, Centre for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. You're also building up some work that in quality assurance that is taking place. All of that is a momentum. There's a growing wave of development of which you are part. It seems to me that in this university, if I may say, the tide is rising and everything rises with it. Scholarship, research, students, buildings. You are that university. University isn't something remote out there. It's not Brother Peter alone or Irene or other senior staff. It's you. And the tide is rising. You are helping the tide to rise. Now, I know some of you will go outside and you'll say, does he not realize the tide also goes out? the tide is rising here, and you are creating that. And I think that part of that is indeed the research that you're doing. And the other thing when you think of research is look at student research. Look at year 4 in particular in the undergraduate courses or your master's programs. That is part of the work of a university. Research rarely is an isolated activity. It's part of the work of everyone in the university to be research minded, to be thinking about how you can use research, how you can generate it, how you can do it. I won't go on about that. But it needs managed. Generally speaking, I find in the universities I've been in, is that research teams come together and are often much more effective than isolated things. And I hope no one is offended by some of these remarks. But I don't think personal research is necessarily all that sustainable in a university. It can happen. And of course there are individuals who can do superb research on their own. But you've got to watch that it doesn't become their hobby. You know, who's looking after the other things that the university has to do? And that's maybe a little bit near the bone talking about it as a hobby. But you get the point, it's more of a corporate activity than it is an individual activity. And I think the question always will arise, what research is the university going to support and fund? In my experience, it should not fund someone who's got a particular hobby and that you just want money to pursue it. It's got to be something corporate. I think that it's wise for the university to think, what are the priorities of the university? Now, you could start looking at the mission statement and take from it some of the priorities that I would think important for this university. My view of this is that universities should be very clear about what their priorities are. If I can give an example again from Liverpool Hope University, when we were setting up in the Faculty of Education the priorities, there were a number of priorities that I funded in the university. They included special educational needs. They included learning and teaching, Christian education, international education, and what was the fifth? Can't remember it. But the orientation of the faculty was to these areas, and we said we will fund projects in these areas. So if someone came to me and said, I'm interested in researching what education was like in Greece in the 3rd century BC, I say that's very interesting, go and do it on your own. Why should I fund that? Is that going to benefit society? Now, I'm not saying that that research shouldn't be done. There's a place for that kind of research, but I'm not sure that universities, hard pressed for cash, should put money into that. So that's what I mean by looking at priorities. Just thinking through what the priorities are, and I think that that's really quite an important area for developing a culture in a university. And if you looked at this university, I would have thought areas, and this is off the top of the head, peace in our time. You know, looking at education for peace, education for mutual understanding, looking at learning and teaching in Palestinian schools. Because, you know, I look at the students outside and they're looking at rote learning as still as a technique of learning that you think, you know, is that going to lead to research mindedness and the critical thinker? So there are a number of things that one could look at there, and it's not for me to suggest necessarily what the priorities would be, but I think it's good for the university to think about that. I think that part of the culture is to involve other universities, and many of you will do that. Many of you will be in touch with other universities, learning from them, looking at what they're doing, and benchmarking your own research against them. What are the requirements for staff? Well, the first question I suppose I would ask is, should all staff be expected to be research active? In my view, the answer to that question is yes, they should. Now, they may be research active in different ways. As an early teacher, an early researcher, it may be that you're using research simply to inform your teaching. That should happen anyway. There'll be others who will be moving along the spectrum of activity, collecting data, collecting it locally or nationally or internationally. And there are some spectacular researchers in this room. I don't have to tell you who they are. You know who they are, and they'll no doubt get recognition today. There are also people who are grafting away in their own way with small-scale studies. Good for you. Keep at it. You may not get recognition today, but you'll get recognition from your students, and one day, who knows, you too may be recognized. You know, whenever I come to prize days, one of the things I often say, and this isn't a particularly good environment to make this comment when I think of it, but remember the roses that bloom in December. Now, if you come from Scotland, there are few roses blooming in December, but some people, it's not their time yet, but it will become their time as great researchers. You might be doing low-key research at the moment. That will grow, that will develop. I hope that will be research that will become very significant, and maybe significant to the extent that it gets national and international recognition. But all staff, I think, should be active in some way. Should be active in some way. Not always having to do international projects, but in some way, all staff in a university should be research active. That should derive from departmental policies or faculty policies or university policies. The notion that every member of staff is actively engaged in research in some way, so that research doesn't become the kind of province of the half-dozen people who are getting the big money. That's not just what it's about. It's about everyone being active in some way. Where do I find time? This is the big question. People, I bleat on about all this sort of stuff. Where do you get the time? In my view, research has to be built into the working year. Not necessarily every day, not necessarily even every week, but it's got to be built into the academic year. What I did in Liverpool Hope University, just to give you an illustration of how you can manage it, is I set up a system where I said to members of staff, you can apply for what I've described here as a mini sabbatical. At Christmas time, you can have 4 weeks when you're doing nothing else but research. So you get no teaching, no administration, no community activity, research only. Take you off all the committee work and all of that sort of stuff. Go and do your 4 weeks. Tell me what you're going to do with it. It's not a right that you have. Tell me what the outcome's going to be. Or, even more interestingly, the 12 weeks in the period between May and September. I said you can have 3 months when you can do research. You won't have teaching, you won't have administration, you won't have to do any community action. You can do your research over 12 weeks. And many staff took that up. Roughly of the 110 staff in Liverpool Hope, nearly 40 people took up one or other of those. That was where they got their research time. It's because you need research in chunks. You can't get 2 hours on a Tuesday and 5 or 3 hours on a Wednesday or an hour on a Monday morning. That's no use for research. Research has to be in blocks. So you need to consolidate time. And it's not a question of getting research leave. My colleagues used to say, I'm taking 3 weeks research leave or something. I'd say, what do you mean by leave? That's your work. It's not something that you've got a vacation to do it in. It's actually what you're expected to do. So my advice to you is to say, within your department, look at that question of how do you chunk up the working year? And can you carve out 4 weeks here or 6 weeks there or 8 weeks over the summer or whatever? Find ways of consolidating time and say, that's what's available for research. And it's not, one of the things I did not allow was someone to do both the December and May. I said you could do one or the other. If you choose to do that, that's fine, but you won't do both. 1 or 2 people finishing their doctorates, for example, actually got both so that they finished their doctorates, and that was that. So just think about that. Where do you get time? Be clever about how you use the working year. Be clever about it, and usually there are ways of finding that. And I found this just a very helpful way of encouraging new researchers to say, now I've got time, that's what I'm going to do. And one of the things, it's also important, if I may say, to people in administration, that research time isn't time lost. It's absolutely part of what an academic should be doing. It's part of the scholarly activity, is to do research and to take 3 months or whatever it is to do, to write an article or whatever you're wanting to do. Support for staff. Work with one another. Work with partnerships within the university. I think one of the things that can often be very helpful, you can find someone, even a young member of staff, say in the English department, talking to a biologist and say, how do you do your research? What are the systems you do to do your research? Look at partnerships within the university, but also look at partnerships across other universities. And again, if you can't find a partner in another university, come and talk to someone about it. This university has a growing number of very significant, useful, helpful academic partners. Use them. Use them mercilessly. And I think that is important. The other thing that I have done previously, and I don't commend this to you, I don't think, in Glasgow University, where I was principal of a college of education and then became the dean, having taken the college became the faculty of education. I had a fairly large number of staff, about 40 staff, doing an MSc in research methods. So this was a quick fix. I brought in a professor from another university and said, run an MSc in research methods for 40 staff. Now, it had some benefits. That would be something I think to consider in this university. It's quite expensive thing to do, but it gets research onto the agenda very quickly, and it gets people more confident. I think what it did in Glasgow was it brought a confidence about the research culture, because there were 40 people who had MScs in research methods. And I can easily get you people who can come and teach research methods and get you an MSc degree or something of that kind. But it is a kind of quick injection of research methods if there's a lack of confidence about methods of teaching research. What are some of the other issues? And I'll be very brief about these. What's the cost of doing research? And of course you have to say, well, what's the cost of not doing it? The cost of not doing it is that you're not taken seriously in the modern world as a university. So it seems to me that it's not something that is all that negotiable. A university should be a place of research. And this university has already moved well along the journey of research. It's a question now of how do you keep that momentum going. So I don't think that is even an issue for you as a staff. This question arises from staff, does all research need to be published? The answer is no, it doesn't. It doesn't need to be published, but it is a very interesting indicator of the quality of research when it is published, and it's good for you to get published. So it doesn't need to be published, but it does need to be witnessed and to be recognized. And good research ought to be published. And if you're finding difficulties in where to publish, and then again talk to someone who's a good researcher who will tell you where to publish. And don't publish in low-grade journals. In the modern world, in European universities, too many people publish in journals that are not peer-reviewed. Get stuff into peer-reviewed journals. That's when you get your reputation. That's when it begins to grow. And journals are graded so that you know which journal to get material in. And I noticed from some of the publications in this university, some of you are published in very high quality international journals. I would just say, well done, congratulations, because it's a brutal world to get into those journals. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 years for an article, when you put it forward, to get published. It's a long process. For those who are starting out, watch the journals you apply. Don't try and get into one of the international journals with your first article, because it not likely to happen. It's a tough old world, and you've got to play it carefully. So that's something that I'm sure your research council will look at. How do you and where do you publish? Vital issue. It is important to have regular research seminars, just hearing what people are doing, and you're doing it this afternoon. You've got, a whole range of people talking this afternoon about that. The regularity of that just develops a culture, and that culture is important. And as a university, and maybe particularly as departments within the university, develop a national and international profile. Some of you are already have developed an international profile, certainly national profile. A lot of you will also develop profiles locally, but get known for certain things. And that's why I say set your priorities. Don't have 42 projects going on right across the university. That width won't get you into international journals. You need to get teams of people working on concentrated things, in my experience. Some of the other issues, well, measuring the quality of research. If you were in a UK university at this point, you would be obsessed with this REF, the Research Excellence Framework. This is every member of staff is judged. Where are you on your research? And that is done mainly by publications. What publications, how many, and in what grade of journal? Pretty well how it works. I mean, it's a very complicated sort of formula that is used, and they take into account all sorts of things. They take into account, interestingly too, whether you're an early researcher or a mature researcher. So for an early researcher, all you need is 1 or 2 articles. For a fully fledged researcher, 4 articles are required to be in the REF. Worth looking at, but very tricky. The other thing, and maybe the last main point I want to make is this. Have a research ethics committee that is working. Research ethics nowadays is a very serious issue. What are the ethics of research? If you're researching human subjects, even sending out a questionnaire. Have a committee that's looking at it. Are you alert to some of the human rights issues that you might be dealing with? Are you alert in an area like genetics to some of the very serious issues of ethics that you're dealing with? I think a university needs to have a quite strong research ethics committee. And again, that's something that I'm sure you're looking at. What developments do I see? And this is my final comments. I think your research strategy is part of a developing quality of a very impressive university, 40 years of work so far, and looking at the work in learning and teaching, quality, buildings, staffing, high quality staff, it's all moving towards more and more a journey of development and a journey of continuing improvement. I think it's part of the way in which Bethlehem University is on a journey of development. It's part of that, and it's, for me, it's just a privilege to have any part of that at all. Research has got to be part of that. You would never develop a university without it, but it all depends on you. Because a university, as I've said, isn't just the senior administration, it's not people out there, it's you. You're the people who are taking this forward, and you're the people who I'm sure will develop research in ways that will ensure that this university has not only a national profile with the Palestinian people, but an international profile for the kind of research that some of you are already doing, and I'm sure a lot of you will continue to do. Thank you very much for listening today.